Hi, Nathan here with a quick note on this episode. The audio is not where we'd like, and you'll hear a splice at the end where Laura reads her section. I hope you don't mind and enjoy.
This is a spoiler.
You can't listen to this and not have spoilers.
There's parodies about his writing, about his extremely long sentences, and I want to read some of those. They sound funny.
Yeah, there's one that does. I think it's in one of the Wes Anderson movies where they're one person's reading and he's clearly trying to do a mockery of Cormac McCarthy, and it's just like a 10-second scene, but it's hilarious. Owen Wilson.
Owen Wilson, really? Wow.
Oh, and Royal Tenenbaums, right?
Yeah, that's right. If you can see it on YouTube or whatever. But I just wanted to say, I have to really just apologize. This is something I did not finish.
I so knew that was going to happen. You know why?
Why?
Because I know you read the night before.
Yeah, and it was so much longer than I thought it was going to be. Because it's on a PDF, and I couldn't hold the thickness in my hand and think, damn, I need to you know what I mean? Right. I couldn't feel the weight of it until the scroll bar just did not reduce.
It did
not go away.
And going.
Still only got a third of the way through, so I got some of the flavor, but I'm going to sit back and just let you guys have at it and be here for
Believe me, even doing a third, it's not. You can't not read the whole thing. Unfortunately, with Proust, some things I know with our Major David Foster Wallace. Remember a couple of times you did some big Foster Wallace pieces.
Oh yeah,
and you and I didn't finish, but still you could
the
still.
Pale King, right? I mean,
right.
That one I was like, you know what? You didn't finish this novel, so I'm not sure I need to read this part. If this could maybe have been an edit, but anyway, that was just me lashing out at him for nothing.
Yeah.
But anyhow,
I was literally up till 5 a.m. yesterday, reading furiously.
You gotta give credit. Oh my god.
So I think I read incredibly carefully for the first 300 pages, and then I was running out of time. A little synopsis back.
Wait, how long is your
430 pages?
So you were reading a hard copy.
Yeah, the last quarter I was really. I mean, I read it, but you know how carefully I had to read Proust to actually.
We're all talking about Swann's Way, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because what I read, which was, I guess it's the Moncrief translation, was only 300 pages.
Oh, I have a new translation by Lydia Davis.
Lydia Davis, okay.
The one I have. I might go to Moncrief for the second one, though, because I've heard he's, the other people who do the Penguin classic version are not as good.
It's good that people read different translations because, I don't know, maybe we can give her a different impression.
I was really impressed by how they could get away with some of the translations. Some of them seemed, a pun that I would get based on the way it sounds in English. And I was like, that's clean. That felt too clean of a translation,
Well, sorry, which translation were you reading?
I am going to look it up for sure. Okay. I'm going to scroll back to the top. Sorry, I just want a public service announcement. Everybody read a paper book. Just paper. We need to preserve what it is to feel the weight of stuff. It's making a lot of things going and finding sections.
In the translator's preface of the Lydia Davis version, she mentions that, what was the other translator you'd mentioned?
Moncrief, that's mine.
Yeah. He's the canonical translator, takes a lot of actual liberties with the literalness of the text.
I think he was the first translator. And also, I think he's the one that came up with the remembrances of things past. He was also the one, he was translating it, I think, when Proust was very ill and dying.
Yeah, you gave me a mini heart attack, Laura, because the title of mine is called The Way by Swans, not Swan's Ways. Oh, man, did I read the wrong one?
No.
Okay, do you want me to launch into my spiel?
Yes.
Yeah, man. Let's hear it.
All right, let's summarize Swann's Way. All right. This is basically a novel about men who have a lot of feelings about women by the it was published in 1913. It opens with the image of a boy, maybe 7 or 8, trying to get to sleep and being unable to do so. And the reason he can't get to sleep is because he needs a good night kiss from his mother Why won't she give a goodnight kiss? It's because she's entertaining family friends downstairs and can't be bothered. So for the next 40 pages, you get the boy's agony and scheming about how to get the mother's attention, which he finally does eventually. She reads this weird book to him all night. I think we might touch on that later. So at that point, just to give a little bit more background, the narrator is the boy once he has become a man, and the narrator is, speaking from the perspective of the present, but kind of recounting, I guess, his memories. And it's, told in a very complicated style that obviously the boy couldn't possibly do at the time, but is obviously sort of evocative and very much from the perspective of the boy. I'm guessing the time being narrated at this point when he's, trying to get to sleep is the late 1880s or maybe early 1890s. In any event, one of the people who was being entertained by the mother, one of the family friends, one of the people who's effectively keeping her away from the boy is a certain Charles Swann. He's an heir to a high bourgeois family that apparently made a fortune in stock trading. He has strong ties to aristocratic society. It's noted he's of Jewish origin, and it's rumored that he has a wife that is cheating on him. I guess this is something the boy learned later or overheard or something. And I guess Swann knows the family because the narrator's grandfather had been a friend of Swann's father, and Swann had an estate where the boy was. Had an estate in. Okay, let me back up a little bit. This is not the boy's house where he's falling to sleep. It's his grandmother's house, his grandparents' house. The boy lives in Paris, but the family goes up on these long vacations to the grandparents' house. It's in this place called Cambrai, this town called Cambrai in Normandy. It's a fictional French town, but I guess it's based on a place that Proust actually went to when he was a kid, and the town literally changed its name to Cambrai. I think in the 1970s. They seem to be going there in the spring on some sort of, how French take these long vacations, I guess. I don't know.
That was a part where people would travel in and out and you would meet new characters because there would be travel between school years or something. And that caused one of the characters anxiety, but yeah.
Yeah, right. And so, Swann has an estate up in Cambrai. That's, why he happens to be up there. So, in this initial section, towards the end of it, the narrators talk about how this was this memory of going to sleep was his only strong memory of Cambrai until one day he randomly had this Madeleine cake dipped in tea. This is him speaking in the present now, right? After having this taste, he started to have all sorts of strong memory of his childhood and going up to Cambrai. And, obviously, I think he had some sort of propositional knowledge. I went up to Cambrai, it was at my grandparents' house. It wasn't like amnesia. It was just he didn't have strong memories of it. And it's tasting this cake, this Madeleine cake, that brings back that sort of experiential knowledge of the time. So the reason that the Madeleine cake reminds him of the time is because he recalls that his great aunt, I guess, on his father's side also had a house up in Cambrai, and she's like this crazy old lady who never leaves the house, and she likes to have Madeleine cakes dipped in tea, I guess, and he would taste them when he visited, and somehow that's the sort of concrete thing that triggers, when he has that in the present, it triggers his memory of that past incident, and somehow all sorts of experiential memories come flooding back to him as a result. That's all within the first 50 pages or so, which is its own distinct section. It's a sort of overture giving the themes of the novel. Just to give a structural overview of the book, there are basically 3 sections. The first is called Cambrai. It includes the overture section, and it includes a longer section that kind of has an episodic structure. It's a sort of coming of age narrative for the boy, with a lot of different incidents that teach him something or other. These are all the childhood memories that essentially come flooding back to him after he has that Madeline cake. One of the things is that he and his family, they take a lot of walks, and there's two primary paths on which to take a walk. One is called Swann's Way because it goes by Swann's estate, and the other is called, I'm going to butcher this, but the Guermantine's Way? Is that how you say it? Look, I think that we have to stipulate that we're just going to butcher a lot of these things.
Yeah, well, there's not a professional in this bunch.
Okay.
I
don't know.
Guermantes. Okay, Guermantes Way. Excellent. All right, the Guermantes Way. The Guermantes is this aristocratic family, who I guess were like the local aristocrats.
They become big in the rest of the novel of but not after the Swann's Way section. I mean, after this Swann's Way first part of this 1,000-page novel. The Guermantes become bigger later on.
Yeah, and it's said that somehow or other, like, these two ways become kind of like a metaphor for the narrator, like the bourgeois kind of stable life and the kind of more aristocratic romantic life. So a particularly important incident when he's a kid is that on a walk on Swann's Way, he randomly sees Swann's daughter, Gilbert. Gilbert? I don't know. It ain't even. And he kind of falls in love with her instantly. So then there's a second section you come to at page 193 called Swann in Love. And it's all about, it's supposedly, this is the narrator telling about what he's heard about Swann's life in Paris before he was born, before the narrator was born. Supposedly the narrator heard this from his grandma, sort of gossip or something, but it's clear that he's kind of embellishing or something, or somehow like using telepathy to exactly what happened. And even so at page 193, you're hearing about Swann. He's basically this idle rich playboy. This is who goes to aristocratic parties, and he likes to sleep around with the lower classes. This is probably around like the late 1870s at this point. What he reminds me of, he's like Bruce Wayne if Bruce Wayne wasn't actually Batman. Like, that's basically Swann.
Yeah, you mean the rich Bruce Wayne, the dude, the guy versus the superhero.
Persona that he puts on to distract, just like Clark Kent played the doofus to make you realize that they're not powerful.
Yeah. So even one day he gets involved with this woman named Odette de Crécy, and then his life begins to unravel as a result. He doesn't realize this at first, and he doesn't realize this for a really, really long time. But she's basically like what was called a quote kept woman, which is sort of like a fancy sex worker, I guess.
She was
having a sugar daddy.
She was a prostitute.
Yeah, right.
She was a hooker.
Right. Yeah. It's really weird. Like, he falls in love with her, kind of not realizing this and kind of repressing the knowledge that this is her actual reality. And I guess she kind of falls in love with him. That's kind of the big question of the section. Over time, he comes to suspect that she's sleeping with other men, which of course she is, because that's her job.
Yeah, right? That's how she makes money.
Right. From that point, the other thing that this reminded me of, it's like the plot of Pretty Woman gone horribly wrong. So anyway, he's like mad with jealousy. He's like, oh my God, she's sleeping with other men and blah, 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 right? Okay, so anyway, that goes on, reaches a crisis, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, the last section of the book starts about 399 in the Davis translation, lasts about 50 pages. It's really sort of a coda. It's called Place Names the Name, in the Davis translation at least. It's the narrator again, a little bit older. He's not, it's his time in Paris, and, he sees that Swann's daughter. So this woman, Odette de Crécy, that is actually the woman who Swann ends up marrying. Despite all his concerns about jealousies, they marry. They apparently have a daughter, the Gilbert girl that the narrator saw earlier in the Cambrai section. So in any event, we go to this last section, place names. It's the narrator in Paris. He sees Gilbert in a park and, he starts to kind of become friends with her. He's really in love with Gilbert, but she doesn't really reciprocate. And it's that whole kind of dynamic. That's basically where the novel ends. She goes away on a long trip, towards the end of the section. And it's, him being depressed and walking through the park at the end and actually seeing Odette de Crécy in the park. And, the narrator in the present is kind of thinking back to that memory as a boy seeing Odette in the park, and the narrator in the present is thinking, that basically, I don't know, women were so much prettier when I was a boy, basically. It's basically that whole thing where everything in the present sucks, but, it seemed like everything was magical. And
I think he was saying they were more elegant.
Yeah, more elegant. You're right. That's a better word. That's a better way to phrase it. But it kind of connects, I think, to the sort of idea that, his present is kind of depressing and, he's trying to, I don't know, bring back something of the emotional charge of his youth. In any event, that's my spiel. I hope I didn't butcher it too badly.
If I can just jump in here quickly, because it
very good job.
Directly relates to your spiel, and it seems that I'm the only one with innocent ears, because when you had mentioned that Odette is, in some sense, a high-class prostitute of some sort, that blew my mind.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Really?
Because I knew she was. Because I'm all for women's liberation, and it's not insane to me that women would sleep around even at this time. But I directly remember a scene where Swann, in the midst of his jealousy, would go to brothels not to sleep with women, but to somehow ease out information about possibly Odette having been there. I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird. Why would why would that happen? Working in
of
a
all
brothel
places to go
know anything about Odette?
Did you make that she was the lady in pink?
Mm-hmm, yeah. So I purposely didn't read any other info. I only read the book. I didn't read anything else. So
in the book, it's I'm pretty sure. I mean, I don't know this for sure, but did anybody else make the connection that she might be the lady in pink that Adolphe has in his sitting room? Remember Adolphe, the uncle?
Yes, he had the pearls, and and he was disappointed with.
I think that's her, that lady in pink.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah,
I think that's right.
Wasn't there another scene directly? And I might be confusing characters, and it might have not been Uncle Adolphe, but Odette told Swann that I thought it was Adolphe, propositioned her at one point, which had him break off relations. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, that's correct as well.
Yeah.
But in that section, it talks about how, the parents were so mad at the uncle for introducing this courtesan to, which is the nice name for a prostitute, right?
Right.
To the little boy, and how it was that was it. We never saw, that was it. He was gone. And then you kind of get hints of, I knew this guy, this uncle that was years ago. And so I don't know. I think that's a pretty safe connection, but I'm not 100% sure.
What's fascinating about the style is that...
But hold on, I'm sorry, just one thing. I just want to... Yeah. Just jumped up at me. The woman in the room, if we're talking about the same woman, she was an actress.
That's correct. That is correct.
Wait, hold on.
And he was disappointed with his impression of what an actress should be because she wasn't Harlequin. She was rather normal seeming. Yet because things were dropped she knew of a duke, she dropped that, and then he's like, man, she's got the status, but she doesn't seem like anybody, but she's got a nice pink dress and pearls. So maybe that is not the same woman unless that is what she became. And that's where the last 2/3 of the book would be helpful to know about.
Yeah, well, if there's clearly established that woman is an actress. Okay, so we're talking about the incident where this is the Uncle Adolphe who
And he doesn't want to come in, but the woman's like, yeah, bring in that little boy. Let me see him. I'll pinch a cheek.
Yeah, no, he didn't want that.
It's in Lydia Davis's translation in the introduction. She says it because it says, nearly all, in fact, are introduced in Swann's way. The young protagonist, his parents, and his grandmother, Swann, his daughter, Gilbert, and Odette, who is both the mysterious lady in pink early in the book and later the lovely Madame Swann.
Whoa.
Right? Oh my God.
Whoa.
Mind blown. I think, now that you say it, it's just very obvious, and also obviously a big focal point of the novel, which I hope I didn't miss, you mentioned, Daniel, is, of course, Swann being a friend of the family, that is, a friend of Marcel's family, or the narrator's family, is held at kind of arm's length due to his quote-unquote bad marriage.
Yeah, that's right.
Wait a second, and I think now another thing makes sense. I think we all got rooked by the fact that's just what she said she was.
And there's something else later in the novel, and I can't even remember how to try to search for it. But she does talk about something related to acting, or it's not completely fabricated. I just can't remember though.
If you can remember anything, the one thing about having a text is Control F, and I could find. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I know. I have it in my Kindle. I have a search function, so I just put the lady in pink in there, and the first thing that popped up was the introduction instead of going to that section. But I don't have it. Don't know what to search for. But it's clear that she has a colorful way of describing what she does that obscures it. She deludes herself, and she also deludes Swann, I think, in the way that she...
And us.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it comes out so obvious. I don't think it's like she is a prostitute. It never really says she is a prostitute. It just alludes to it, and you figure it out, and you know it, but not even...
Well, Cesare did.
Some of us.
Yeah, but not even the little clan, the little cult they're a part of. They don't even think of her as a prostitute, and not in the same way that.
I just want to say honestly, I never made a specific connection when they went on for a while about how his parents just absolutely despised Swann's wife, right, Madame Swann, right, and it was never really entirely clear. That except that she was I thought she was just like a bitch, or that there was something about her that she felt she was above everyone else or something, and that it just really put them off, right? That's what I thought. It never really connected to me like, oh, they could not stand Swann's wife because she was a lady of the evening previously. Continue.
Yeah, they have all this language in there about, sort of the ability of Swann's family, his mother, his grandmother, all these people. They have such perfect character, so they can just sort of pick out the riffraff, and that's really all. That's what they say. But what it is a class war. They know which class they belong, and they don't find her to be of the class that they are in.
Right.
Even though in some ways they are.
So there's a rumor that Swann's wife in the Cambrai section, there's a rumor that she is cheating on Swann, that he's essentially a cuckold, and and that seems to be, it's this kind of scandal that puts the family off about Swann, I think.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but I think it's not all of it.
Right.
There's a lot of mischievous stuff happening within other situations that are maybe less bothersome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I think that's part of it. I think that's a good thing to point to, because you don't want to say, oh, they're of a certain class, but I don't know if it felt like maybe it was more than just that. Like, she just wasn't in the crowd,
Yeah, the class thing is really important.
Critical.
Yeah. He talks about, there's at one point where the narrator says the bourgeois people in those days formed for themselves a rather Hindu notion of society and considered it to be made up of closed case, in which each person from birth found himself placed in the station which his family occupied, and from which nothing except the accidents of an exceptional character and hope for marriage could withdraw him in order to move him into a higher case So, I mean, I think that's kind of what, that's true. That's always in the background of these interactions.
One thing's, I figured it out. I just found in this section, and it's impossible to relate to you guys. And also what you're saying, Daniel, I want to maybe draw out from that. We should talk about class, because maybe it's just historical, but it's also very interesting to hear people talking about class openly and directly in this way, in a way that I feel like we often don't have a modern language for it, like in capitalism, say. We have the middle class and the upper class, but it's more complicated than that. And but anyway, there's this section, and it's entirely what they're bringing into the meeting with the uncle. It's just that he knows the uncle is associated with actresses, and this is a woman of the same class. And what's funny about that remembrance is that she doesn't say anything about being an actress. That's just what he assumed. Yeah. And the thing about it is that he's I can't figure out why anybody would give her money. It's but what's funny is that even that he thought she was an actress, he thought it was the most immoral and despicable thing. She might as well have been a prostitute, because in that class it's the same thing, I think, you're saying.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, so I just want to suggest something about the style. I know that it seems like a crazy style. To my mind, it's so difficult to read. It's kind of beautiful. I mean, just to describe it, it's basically extremely long sentences with a lot of different clauses, a lot of parenthetical descriptions. And it's why would anybody write this way? And I think that, to my mind, the thing that really kind of revealed it to me was the most important kind of thing is an incident from the Cambrai section with this guy, another family friend named Legrand, I guess.
Legrand.
Legrand, okay. So basically, Legrand has he's a family friend, and to make a long story short, he seems like this cool guy who reads. He's kind of like a hipster kind of guy almost, right? He reads a lot. He has a lot of poetical observations. He seems really egalitarian. He's kind of, woke, to use today's terminology. But, he also happens to have some friends in the aristocracy. And there's one point when the family needs to ask him one little tiny favor. And this one little tiny favor might just possibly result in his aristocratic friends realizing that he has these kind of lower class friends, which is the narrator's family, right? And Legrandin doesn't just say no, or I don't know how he would. He doesn't want to show that he's being snobby, right? He doesn't want to show that he cares about this social status stuff. And he launches into this ridiculous speech, which is an excuse about why he can't do the favor, I guess.
You ask somebody for a favor, and they start changing the subject wildly and trying to point to, oh, look at the sky, oh, look at the bird. It's he just does everything to avoid a direct answer.
It was one of the funniest points I thought it was one of the funniest points of the book, because he starts going do you know someone there? He's oh, do I know someone? Do I know anyone? He's
yeah, that's
right. And when I look at this speech that Legrand gives, I think this is a little bit like the language of the novel. This kind of highly convoluted.
Can you quote a little from it?
I was asking if you knew anyone there. There as everywhere. I know everyone, and I know no one, answered Legrandin, who was not going to give in so quickly. I know a great deal about things, and a very little about people. But in that place, the very things themselves seem to be people, rare people, delicate in their very essence, disappointed by life. Sometimes it is a manor house that you encounter on a cliff by the side of the road, where it has stopped to point its sorrow toward the still pink evening, where the golden moon rises, while the returning boats, fluted and dappled water, hoist the flame of the evening in their masts and carry its colors. Sometimes it is a simple solitary house, and then it just goes on. So I don't want to keep reading, but
Can I just read a little bit more, because I think this is my favorite part. I have it underlined. Monsieur Legrandin, how do we insist it further? just to give you the context, this is a conversation between
Legrandin.
Mr. Legrandin and the family trying to get a letter of introduction, or trying to see about a letter of introduction to his sister. And so the sentence reads, Mr. Legrandin, had we insisted further, would have ended by constructing a whole system of landscape ethics and a celestial geography of Normandy, sooner than to admit to us that his own sister lived a mile from Baalbec, and be obliged to offer us a letter of introduction, which would not have been such an object of terror for him, had he been absolutely certain, as in fact he should have been given his experience of my grandmother's character, that we would not have taken advantage of.
What's shocking about this is that he had previously in the book ranted against swans, and I think there's a really interesting observation the narrator makes later on. So this is what the narrator has to say about this. Is apparent hypocrisy. And this certainly does not mean that Legrandin was not sincere when he ranted against snobs. He could not be aware, at least from his own knowledge, that he was one, i.e. a snob, since we are familiar only with the passions of others, and what we come to know about our own i.e. our own passions, we have been able to learn only from them, i.e. other people, like telling us, what the hell how we're actually reacting and stuff.
We see ourselves.
Yeah, upon ourselves, they, i.e. our own passions, act only secondarily by way of our imagination, which substitutes for our primary motives, what we actually want, alternate motives, what we think we want, that are more seemly. It was never Legrandin's snobbishness that advised him to pay frequent visits to a duchess. I.e. his snobbishness, would instruct Legrandin's imagination to make that duchess appear to him as being endowed with all the graces. So in any event, it's like...
Wait, what translation are you reading from?
The Lydia Davis.
Wow, I mean, I was just following the paragraph the sentences you just read, and I'm using the Moncrief one. It's like totally different. Totally different.
What is yours?
Upon ourselves, they react, but indirectly through our imagination, which substitutes for our actual primary motives, other secondary motives, less stark and therefore more decent.
Yeah, you know what?
It's like totally different.
Yeah, well, it's the same basic idea in the sense that you're lying to yourself all the time and you don't really know yourself, right? But yeah, it's true. I would say that Davis, if I had to guess, she has maybe a more literal trait. I've tried to actually look at the French a little bit in some passages, or at least like one passage, and it just looked like she was trying to adhere more closely to the original. But I think there's a good debate to be had about which is the better approach, I would say. Because I think that Moncrief is clearer at times.
Right. I guess so. I don't know.
Yeah, but even I have a feeling like all these sentences. I mean, when I tried to read this novel about 2 or 3 years ago, and I just couldn't. I'm gonna be honest. I thought it was like a bunch of fancy French bullshit, right? Like, when you go into the Starbucks and you see that Madeleine, and it's like, ooh, a little Madeleine, a fancy little cake, right? And like, that's kind of what I took into the novel, and I was like, oh my God, like, I just thought, like, I must be missing something because this just seems like ridiculous, like precious. But like, what I came to realize, there's kind of like almost like an esoteric meaning of the book. And it's like, and I think it's like, all these sentences, like, you're not supposed to take them at face value, I think. Like, I think you're constantly supposed to be like pushing through the actual descriptions to what like is actually going on with these characters.
Well, I mean, the thing that made me like jump the minute you said, I felt like it was like, this is like fancy French bullshit.
Yeah.
Which I see your point, and I want to kind of talk about with everyone the style, and then at some point talk about the Marxist analysis and the Freudian analysis. But the thing is, what I found reading through it, and I read it 100 years ago and then just again now, is that I feel like I'm living in the wrong century to read this book or to really appreciate it. because I would read it through, and you got a sentence that's going on for about 2 pages, okay, with lots of descriptions and incredible words, and then I'm like, okay, what's happening? What's happening? And it's, I feel like us here in 2019, in 21st century, post 20th century, and this Proust is, I mean, this book is considered probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest, works of the 20th century. And I'm thinking, our problem is that we're like, our brains are wired to be aware of what's going to happen, what is happening, what is going on.
I have the opposite experience, is that I think this is a novel worthy of all of its praise.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree.
I've never been so taken.
Oh, absolutely.
By the story. And what I felt like the style was that it was, the way that it comes across is that we're thinking about this in terms of memory, and we're thinking about this, the way that we remember things. And when we talk, as I'm talking to you now, I probably have no periods in my sentence. The thoughts are unfurling and unwinding as I think of them, as I remember them. And that is what the whole entirety of the novel really is about, in my opinion. Is this about this idea of just an unraveling of memories in the way that it happens. And it is so much less about plot. And that's the first third of the book. It took training to get me to realize, okay, this is not about plot. You can tell me the story, but the plot is so not the point of the story. The point of the story is to like sort of describe the human experience. And he does it so well. And it doesn't even matter that this person is a prostitute and that this person, has all these things that seem foreign to us, but that everything that he described about that relationship, I knew inside and out. I had felt and experienced everything that he had said. And it was like I was reading my own experience. I don't know if you guys felt like when you were reading some of that, you're like, oh my God, I've done all of that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But the thing that I was responding to, what I was trying to say is that I feel like, maybe, again, you may be different. I just feel like we are at a point in time. Here we are. I mean, he wrote in the early 1900s. This was published in 1913. This is prior, obviously, to the great revolution of film making and films and acting in films and plot becoming the center of life. Plot becoming incredibly important. And I just feel like it's harder for people now, today, to appreciate the phenomenal, incredible, almost unparalleled kind of writing that this is.
Yeah, I think it's true. And I think what it's interesting is that when we talk about it, for my book, it was 482 pages, which is not a really, it's not an abnormally long novel in comparison to many things that we read now. And we whiz through them. But the way he writes commands you to sit and go slowly. And I feel like that's his entire point in Remembrance of Lost Time. And when you get to the end and he talks about how, you can't go back home. Like you can't ever look at something that you remember and see it the way that it was. It doesn't have it. You're never going to get those moments back. And so you're forced to just sit and experience with him as he sees the flower. And it's like, if you can't do that, you're confronted in this novel with I was confronted with my inability to sit and go and be mindful and just not hurry and rush it along and try to get to the what is happening. Let me get to the point. And that, like, I feel like I missed the first third of the novel just because I was trying to do that for so long. And then I was like, you know what, fuck it. I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to take the ride with him down Messagli's Way and see what I see. And I don't know where this is headed. And that's when it was like everything started to become like I was in his head with him. I was in his world with him in a way that like you not normally in a novel. You're really an outsider. And it was fascinating to think, like, what is his brain like? What is this guy's brain like that he could do what he did in this way and describe things in this way that seems so...
I mean, the extent and the depth to which he went into his love for Odette.
Or the flowers by the stream. I mean, any of it. Wow, how on...
Where did it come from?
I mean, I just think that what you guys are all saying is like of the same kind. It like strikes a chord together because like it is incredibly precious, and we don't have time for it in modern society writ large.
No, we don't.
You know,
exactly.
And it does, you know, like all good things, it deserves attention to get stuff out of it. You can miss things if you don't, you know, follow along, and also a lot of it, like there was this one thing, and this is a separate theory that, you know, we could maybe talk about, but it's that there is a difference in like metabolism through time, that people might have just had different cadences of thinking and being and talking. Like there was this one scene where the maid came in and fondled an envelope, and she fondled this envelope, and it said, you know, she looked it over to see if, you know, if she could figure anything out about it. And that seems like a simple thing to do, right? Like think about like how we would do it, right? And then it dropped for me. She did that for 5 minutes. Now if that's like not translation or whatever, but that is, it's like in a Crime and Punishment, there's this one moment where there's a showdown between the detective and the, you know, Raskolnikov, exactly. And there's a pause that between them that lasts like 15 minutes. And they're standing in a room, and you wouldn't see that on a Netflix show.
Not today.
You wouldn't see it. You wouldn't see people standing there sweating it out for 15 minutes, looking at each other and exchanging like all the psychic stuff. You know?
Energy. Exactly.
So this is all true, but even at the time, I think that this was a little bit nuts. So
the editor said that too. Like the original guy.
Yeah, but then didn't he apologize?
Well,
he did later.
Yeah, Andre Gide, you know, famous French author, received this book, was working at a publisher, had to decide whether to print it, and was like, Jesus fucking Christ, 40 pages, and it's the boy going to sleep. What the fuck is happening? Like, even him, right? Like, I think part of it is, this is both the narrator and Swann have an extremely excitable personality. I think that's at least partly it. And like a super sensitive, like the most finely tuned antenna you can possibly imagine. Like a SETI telescope, but, you know, for everything that's happening around them. I think that's it. I think that's why it's like, that's how you get these sort of hyper detailed sentences, I think.
And the things that he comes away with, though, it's like, it's not like he just describes the colors or whatever. He describes the feelings, because part of what's interesting about this is I just happened to be reading Phenomenology of Perception with a group, which is by Maurice Merleau-Ponty. And it's all about how our perception of the world is so much in context. So what we remember, what we think, what we feel, I mean, he describes this. That is his whole way of sharing something. Is he describes what it looks like, what it's what it sounds like, what it feels like, and what it brings out at him in a sort of a psychic way, in the emotional, not just the feelings, but he is so insightful in terms of what he draws out of an experience. Like when he's walking through, I don't know where he's walking through, and he sees the Ventwil daughters after the father has died, and they're having their lesbian affair, but what he says about the sadist. Do you remember that part?
I love that part.
I mean, it was like, whenever you read like Dostoevsky, for example, and he says these things about people, and you're like, damn, that's good. That's so insightful. That's just how humans are. And you've never thought of it that way. He has that throughout. And that particular passage was just, mind blown after you read something like that.
I just thought it was hilarious, the whole thing about, if I'm remembering correctly, like the little boy is like kind of peering into the window, and, he sees this like secret, kind of open secret lesbian couple, and one of them, like the nice girl, they're doing this like shtick, where basically she the nice girl in the relationship wants the other one to like defile the memory of her dead father, beating on a picture of the dead father, and the nice girl is shocked as a result. Like there's this weird dynamic, and
piano teacher, right? Was that the
yeah, that's right. I just can't get over it. I mean, there's I forget what the narrator's commentary is about that.
Well, just
look it up.
It's very touching, I think, on 182 when he says, a sadist of her sort is an artist of evil. But then it goes into the sadists of Mademoiselle Vinteuil's kind are creatures so purely sentimental, so naturally virtuous, that even sensual pleasure seems to them something bad, the privilege of the wicked. And when they allow themselves to yield to it for a moment, they are trying to step into the skin of the wicked and to make their partner do so as well, so as to have the illusion for a moment of escaping from their scrupulous and tender soul into the inhuman world of pleasure. And I understood how much she longed for it when I saw how impossible it was for her to succeed in it. And then it goes on, and it's just like, wow, I never, it's sort of the underside of what she's going through or what she must feel. And I don't know, I thought it's a really profound way of describing sadism.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That made me think of The Story of the Eye by George Bataille. And I just looked up the published date of that came out 15 years after this. So there's something psychoanalytically in the air. That doesn't say anything if you haven't read it, but yeah, I mean, it was about, the intense sexual, like, boundary, like, life, death, like, they're, like, killing people and, like, drinking each other's blood and, like, just, yeah, maybe this time also we can mark that in, like, some kind of a style.
And what he says at the beginning of this, and I just can't, find it, but he's walking and he sees it, and what he remembers about it is that this is how he will forever think of sadism. Like, this is what will come to his mind when he thinks of this. And it's just one of those examples of how we have our feelings about whatever we have and our memories about whatever we have are so in a context that is our experience of life. And that's shown throughout the novel. And, when you think of In Search of Lost Time and remembrance of things past, and the point is that he's, as an adult, going back and he's remembering this. And it's not as though when he's a child, he knows this on a conscious level. Like, the things that he's bringing to the memories are things that an adult brings to the memories. And so he's remembering something, but he's bringing everything that life has sort of made him so far to that. And then similarly, everything that he experienced prior is shaping the present, and just that kind of interesting interplay. It's just an interesting feature, I think.
I took that that kind of feature that you described made me a little bit depressed, because it made me feel that he was describing life as an incredibly subjective experience where there's actually no close connections and bonds between people. I'm thinking out loud, but I'm wondering if there's actually any happy moments between two people in this novel. And I'm thinking of when you, in a sense of memory and creation, it wasn't so objective, in the sense that, like, this author used memory to create his experience and could recreate experiences based off recollections and differences. And I think he did that very many times with Swann, as he revised his memories of what his experiences with Odette were based off what he thought it were. Very much made me think of this kind of one-way relationship, the incredible amount of one-way relationships they show in this book, both with Swann and Odette, the author and his mother, and I think the author and his first love.
Yeah, I think that was what was so interesting to me about this novel, was the incredible sadness that was just throughout. It was nostalgia, but it was also unrequited everything, and that's where it started to feel very Freudian for me, because everything in this story is sort of an object, right? His mother is the original love object, and he just can never get her. And you feel the struggle with that sort of, it just felt like a really insecure attachment, or some kind of ambivalent attachment that he had with his mother. That was interesting because, in the middle of the book, when we're talking about Swann and Odette. But at times you feel like, are we talking about Swann and Odette, or are we talking about Marcel? And
I'm sorry, Jennifer, but the reason I just wanted to jump in at that moment was when you were talking about how in the section Swann and Love, and you're reading along and he's talking about Swann and Odette, but is he really talking about Marcel, who is essentially the narrator? The first part of the book, Combray is in the first person, and Swann in Love is in the third person, and then the last part of the book is in the first person.
Well, is it in the first person? Because I honestly struggle with this. I was like, I just want to figure out, is it subjective? Is it omniscient? What are we really looking at for narrators here? And in the beginning, it is in the first person, but not really, because he is an adult recollecting his younger self. And you can't know omnisciently in the way that he does what your younger self thinks, or can you? I mean, that's sort of the question, right? I feel like that was a very interesting.
Well, then comes in the whole Freudian thing, right? How well do we know ourselves, right?
Well, I think for the Freudian thing for me was just the idea of this sort of love object that kept showing itself for him throughout the novel. That because I don't know, I'm sure we can all agree. It seems pretty obvious to me that when you talk about Swann and Odette, the kind of information that he has is so omniscient that I feel safe to say that this is Marcel's version of events. This is...
Yeah, especially with the timeline. I completely agree. Especially with
it's almost as though you can say, okay, Swann is really Marcel having this experience. Because then when you start reading the last third of the novel, it feels like the repeat. It's like, oh, okay, now we've got him doing the same thing with Gilbert. But the idea being that he never loved these women for who they are. And it wasn't so much like a criticism of him as a character, because I don't think Swann or Odette or any of these people come off as very one-dimensional at all in the way that people try to describe them. So complex to me that they're all of us, they're every part of us. And so Swann is a kind of guy who does what we all do in love at first, which is we don't fall in love with the person. We don't even see the person. There's something about them that makes us fall in love with some part of ourselves, and they become an idealized version. And, the opposite of an idealized version is a villainized. And so we see him go back and forth between she is perfection to she is evil. And it's really because he doesn't see her, and he can't fold the complexities of who she is, and he can't realize what part of that is all about him and all about his own sort of inner struggle of working out that relationship that he never really worked out with his mom. I mean, it just sort of feels like that to me, but I'm very Freudian in my reading, so I get that if that's not what everybody else saw.
Well, I mean, he says here toward the end of the Combray section, just before he starts the Swann and Love thing, when we're going back to this, what you were talking about in terms of omniscience and, first person, third person, first person, he says here, all these memories following one after another were condensed into a single substance, but had not so far coalesced that I could not discern between the three strata, between my oldest, my instinctive memories, those others inspired more recently by a taste or a perfume, and those which were actually the memories of another, from whom I acquired them at second hand. No fissures, indeed, no geological faults. Go ahead.
So I was going to jump. So I think this also. So what I'm going to read, I think, is very closely tied. But the point I wanted to just connect was that maybe this also is part of that subjective tragedy, because how could he envelop the complexities of her? Maybe if that's a part of being separated from people. But this is a section that I think ties. Specifically, remember that word strata towards the very end of this. Just bear with me here. Had my parents allowed me when I read a book to pay a visit to the country it described, I should have felt that I was making an enormous advance towards the ultimate conquest of truth. For even if we have the sensation of being always enveloped in, surrounded by our own soul, still, it does not seem a fixed and immovable prison. Rather, do we seem to be borne away with it and perpetually struggling to pass beyond it, to break out into the world with perpetual discouragement. This is it. We try to discover in things endeared to us on that account the spiritual glamour which we ourselves have cast upon them. We are disillusioned and learn that they are in themselves barren and devoid of the charm which they owed in our minds to the association of certain ideas. Sometimes we mobilize all our spiritual forces in a glittering array so as to influence and subjugate other human beings who, as we very well know, are situated outside ourselves, where we can never reach them. And so if I always imagined the woman I loved as in a setting of whatever places I most longed at the time to visit, if in my secret longings it was she who attracted me to them, who opened to me the gate of an unknown world, that was not by the mere hazard of a simple association of thoughts, No, it was because my dreams of travel and of love were only moments, which I isolate artificially today, though I were cutting sections at different heights in a jet of water, rainbow flashing but seemingly without flow or motion. We're only moments, we're only drops in a single, undeviating, irresistible outrush of all the forces of my life. This is if you type in, had my parents allowed me, you'll get there.
It's a little different in our version, Jennifer, but I have that same thing underlined, and what I have a little note of is...
I remember that part.
What is this jet of life? What is this life force that he was referring to that he's cutting up? You know, that's what I'm trying... Well, that's my note that I had, I remember.
Well, I also, there was something I wanted to say, just that I think this life force and maybe a Freudian analysis about this love for his mother. So remember that he didn't get the kiss, or he got the kiss, but it was in a way that he didn't want at all, because his mother, of course, was kind of duped into hanging out with him all night, because she got her in trouble basically. And like, she reluctantly had to do it. And that was bittersweet, and so they never had that moment again. But the next time that they talk and meet, she offers him something and he takes it. And it's like this sensual experience again. And I think that what might be happening here, the stratification, is like this layering of, or distancing and like abstracting of like a child growing up, but like first is out with yes. Thank you.
This is absolutely, it felt like the moment that his dad was like, maybe you should sleep with him tonight. And he kind of saw that it wasn't really going to happen again. And he
didn't really want to in that way. Yeah. And it was like, oh, this isn't good.
And I thought, oh my gosh, this is what differentiation must be like for kids, like and I have my own kids. I have a little boy right now. And it was so bittersweet. And I'm very interested to see what happens with him and his mother later, like in the later volumes, because it feels like this will probably play out a little bit more.
But to me, I don't have a firm reading on Freud, but this was my favorite part of the entire book, when his father, who seemed to be this, the word's not malevolent, but fickle force, whether granting him his pleasures or not, let his mother, or in fact commanded his mother to stay the night with him, which seemed to be all he wanted. He broke out in tears, and it seemed to the entire object of desire, once he attained it, was too traumatic to actually, all he wanted was the desire itself, not to actually realize it. And it's played out in all the other kind of love affairs throughout the movie.
Well,
throughout the book.
So I just want to jump in real quick because if that's a thread, I just want to make sure that we're getting the nuance through it, though, because it wasn't quite that he got what he wanted, right? Like it was. I mean, I don't want to sketch out the scene, but he didn't get the kiss that he wanted, and then he tried to hang out all night, and then got caught, and his mother was mad at him and wanted him to go to bed, and the father did a power play above both of them,
right,
and told her what to do, and it was like, oh, mom this isn't the way it was supposed to be, and that spoiled it, and so they couldn't really have that relationship again because it was domineered in a way, which I don't know if that plays out later on. I just think that's a crucial, it wasn't as if he got like unsatisfied with the touch of his mother. It was just ruined, Well,
and it was the interesting thread that comes up again and again, which was that he gets what he wants, he has it, but it's not reciprocated in a way that ever feels fulfilling or satisfying to him. That's.
I wonder why that is.
Well,
are you being ironic, or is that like rhetorical?
Rhetorical.
Because I don't know if you know something about Proust that I don't. Like, I haven't made myself a student of this guy, so I don't know if it's because he was clearly hung himself later in life or something.
No,
I think it's. I think in some ways, I was thinking about it a lot throughout the novel, trying to figure out, is this really an unhealthy relationship that he has with his mom, and this is what's sort of messing him up later in the way he pursues and has love. Or is it just that, we all have the struggle of our separateness, and no matter what, you never really get the object of your affection. You can never fully merge with another person, and there's always a discomfort that comes from that realization.
Why would you want to?
That's my exact reading, though, Jennifer. That's why I said it kind of made me sad, and it seemed that what he was describing might be I'm not even going to try to say phenomenological.
Yeah,
Nailed it.
But more so isolated. And when I think of that term, it always means isolated and with solitude and the impossibility of directly connecting with another person. And I just want to read. It's on page 86 in my edition. It says, when I saw an exterior object, my awareness that I was seeing it would remain between me and it, edging it with a thin spiritual border that prevented me from ever directly touching its substance. It would dissipate somehow before I could make contact with it, just as an incandescent body brought near a damp object never touches its wetness, because it is always preceded by a zone of evaporation. And that kind of thing,
wow,
it brought to me to light the kind of relationships that were shown in this book and the impossibility of ever reaching a desire in that kind of Freudian sense as it's evoked continuously throughout this novel. It just ends in trauma or, heartbreak or whatever it is.
Wow. Yeah, I read that passage too, and it didn't sync with me the way it did just now.
It seems to me like, to me, the thread of the book that I keep bringing up seems to be this one-sided way of working through life. And though you have a lot of material to work with, though it's not objective in the sense that you're stuck with what you have, it's yourself writing the story of your life without any necessary connection to other people, because you're writing that story continuously and rewriting it in the same sense that Swann rewrote Odette's story continuously as it suited him.
It's almost like an inversion of the old, what was it that supposedly drove gladiators? The desire for fame and to live in like the life of other minds. But it's internalized in this version, right? Like, so rather than wanting to exist outwardly, it's realizing that this like inward life is. I mean, they turn on the same coin. I think it's a fear of death. Is that too simple? But
or not being remembered.
Yeah, it seems like more. It seems like it has an extra bit of complication to it, like a little bit more of neuroses. Like it's complicated by a hair, that it's actually now not just that other people won't know about you, but that your unique brand of self and being won't persist beyond even you now in this world.
Yeah. There's a passage where I just want to read it out. There's it's towards the end of the Cambrai episode. The narrator boy, is in church, and he's looking at this Madame de Guermantes, whatever it is. Guermantes, thank you. And he's kind of had fancy ideas about this woman, this aristocratic woman. He's finally seeing her in the flesh. It's a little bit disappointing to him in real life, but it's almost like as a weird defense mechanism, he begins to idealize her. And the critical passage is he's kind of narrating his thoughts here. He's saying, now that I was impelled to consider it beautiful by all the thoughts I had brought to bear on it, i.e. her appearance, and perhaps most of all by what is a kind of instinct to preserve the best parts of ourselves, by the desire we always have not to be disappointed, placed her once again, ellipsis, above the rest of humanities, among whom the pure and simple sight of her body had for a moment made me confound her, etc., etc., etc. So this thing about like preserving the best parts of ourselves, it's clearly in there. And it's like, why do you even need to do that? Like, what does that mean? Like, there's an idea of running throughout the Cambrai section that it's like when you're loving someone, it's because you want to be delivered to a certain sort of life. And it's like, what does that even mean? Like, and is that true? Like, I don't know. I don't know. Does that make sense, or does that tie into what people are saying?
I'm not sure I entirely follow. Can you say like?
I mean, what are you searching for through what he's saying?
What he's saying is that he is basically idealizing this aristocrat right then and there to as part of like an instinct to preserve the best parts of ourselves by the desire we always have not to be disappointed.
So I'm taking that as a version of like it's his sin is hoping or something, like that he wants that they're to be better, and so he imagines people to be better than they are, and that's disappointing. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, does this tie in with Swann, what he does to Odette?
Can you just say the page number where you got that again? Because I have trouble following.
It's 180 on the Lydia translation.
The translations are so different.
Yeah, and the last paragraph on the page, about halfway through, now that I was impelled to consider it beautiful by all the thoughts I had brought to bear on it.
Is there a name of another character on that page?
The page...
I would search by the name.
Oh, right. Look for Charlemagne. Probably the first appearance of Charlemagne.
Look for Charlemagne.
And then it's like 2 paragraphs down. I felt it was important.
Or Brabant might be an easy one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny. It matters because I can't search for that exact phrase because it's not coming up.
Yeah, because the glorious. Okay.
Yeah, glorious before. Not the next paragraph, but the paragraph after.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, look for Charlemagne, Nathan.
Thank you. I'm on it. I feel like this is some kind of like really low risk, low stake situation, kind of a bank robbery. Like, we're trying to crack the code. Anyway.
Oh, okay. So I remember this part. This is the time when he says basically he has a picture because she's been so often described of perfection in his head, right? And then he sees this woman who doesn't exactly match up to it in ways that are subtle, but it's so much like her that he says, oh, that must be Madame de Guermantes, right?
Yeah, and then he begins to go through this thought process of like lifting her up and making himself think that Madame de Guermantes is actually what people say she is, right? Is actually the incredibly noble person that she is. And the reason I connected with Swann is because Swann initially thinks of Odette as not being his type, right?
Right.
But his type is like these lower, women from lower social classes who are kind of pink and healthy, right? Like, and whereas, Odette is more like I guess, kind of more emaciated, kind of fashion model-y, I guess. But even despite this, Swann then proceeds to kind of like embellish Odette in his imagination. The critical things that get him to love Odette is that he begins thinking that she looks like a particular woman in a Botticelli painting. And he also begins to associate her with a particular kind of musical phrase, a musical passage that was, I guess, popular at the time. It was written by another character in the novel, the piano teacher, Vintoul, that we mentioned earlier. And it's a really disturbing thought about art, in a way, and about love. It's like, what is the way that we're using art to basically construct other people? Like we're basically embellishing on other people in order to make them conform to the high ideas that we're getting from art, I guess. Also, like, how much of this is also like some weird class thing, right? Like with the Guermantes woman, he wants to believe that she's of a higher social class and that there's a higher thing in the world, almost like a Nietzschean thing, right? He wants to believe there's a higher thing to look towards, and so he begins to construct it in his mind, right? And sorry, go on.
Sorry, I think both your threads are very important, but I can only touch one of them at this time. But I think we should very much remember the class thing you touched upon. But as far as the using art as a way to construct or remember and substantiate a person and substantiate maybe a love that you have for them. And I completely agree that a big theme of this book was Swann very much being standoffish with Odette, thinking she was not his type, like you said. Not very interesting, and she continuously portrayed by Swann as someone of lower taste. But as he started to connect her to paintings he saw, she became substantial in his mind. And so that brings up the idea of how art is a way to buttress your relationships with other people. But what I kept thinking about, well, like, where does it end? If Swann thinks that she's more important because of a painting she reminded him of, why is the painting important to him, for instance? So where does the thread end with art, for instance? Is it not...
I mean, it would just keep hearkening. I mean, I guess, well, I want to say hearkening back, but I think that just to hearken in the first place is calling out. I mean, if something is constantly compounding, like layering up, like a composite, there's, I think maybe that idea of like, layering and how there's like the idea of a composite or an isomorph, the multivariate image of many superposed together, or what they all touch, together. Like you can have things that, flatter, or, a painting, let's say, reckons a certain kind of frame of love captured, and it can be a touchstone for beauty. And then if you can see any kind of a connection, then the thread like extends, like you can see like, branches coming off in meaning, and this, I mean, it seems to be, I guess you could take it as an issue, but it seems to be like a neutrally complexifying thing, which is why, the bad relationship with his mother, it's like, well, bad, but this is also, if it's bad, then it's bad because of the things that go on in a child's development and the situation that he's in. And that's what's, that's what we should be talking about. It's not necessarily, that they're choosing some of these things. A lot of this is situational, and then that might bring back class, again, if we talk about the material situation they do find themselves in, that's that.
Yeah, I think when I read the part about him thinking of her, and basically he's not her type, he's not interested, she says things to him like mine, my, in letters that kind of, it's sort of a trick that she might use to make him believe that there's something there, and it makes you instantly familiar. So she kind of made him instantly familiar, and he wasn't biting until, for whatever reason, it recalled something within him, which was his love of art and the beauty that he saw in art. And so he could elevate her only because he had made this connection. And what seemed significant to me was that in the way that we don't see people that we love, we shape them and we change the way they look. And it is the phenomenology of perception to take what we see and create what is to be seen. So he first saw the angular, right? And it's like one of those tricks when you look at a picture and you can see the old lady or you can see the young lady, you can see the old lady. And so he didn't really ever see anything beautiful in her until he could make an association, until he shifted his gaze just enough so that he could relate her back to this art, to this painting. But it felt to me more like it was saying, she recalls something in me, which causes me to, find it's more about my own obsession with my own self and whatever that is about than it is about her. It's like the art was the way in which he showed that this love was not a love of the actual Odette, but something else.
Wow.
Something that's mysterious is that I think there's stuff going on stage, perhaps, in terms of Swann's development between the end of Swann in Love, which ends with him finally realizing, quote, to think I wasted years of my life that I wanted to die, that I felt my deepest love for a woman who did not appeal to me, who was not my type. And that's the end. Wait, so wait,
and then he gets married, which is all like, okay, I can't wait to read the next volume.
Well, like you got married to her? Wait, and you had a kid with her then? But I think I kind of want to believe that, the supposed person that she's cheating on Swann with in the Cambrai section. Thank you, Wikipedia. It turns out I think he's a gay guy, right? And that's the reason why Swann doesn't care about this Charles guy the Baron du Charles or whatever it is, hanging out with her.
Who's this?
The Baron du Charles, yeah.
Yeah, are we talking about the original guy where he, the uncle?
No,
Okay.
So there's a rumor.
friend that he sends to go hang out with her all the time so he can get the dirt on what she's doing. Remember that guy, Charleuse?
Yep. Okay.
Oh yes.
And supposedly that's the guy in the Cambrai section of the book who, according to the rumor, that Odette is having the affair with. But he's a gay guy. Like, and it's not actually the case. They're just like it's just the same friendship thing going on. And I just wonder whether there was a development in Swann chronologically between the end of Swann in Love and the Cambrai section, where somehow or other Odette and Swann kind of came to an arrangement or something where they kind of finally.
I think she got pregnant. That's my big guess. Was like, okay, she must have gotten pregnant and then they had to marry or something, because why at this point would he marry her? But
yeah, well,
that wouldn't matter.
Because I don't think he really fell out of love with her.
I think
I think he was trying to fall out of it. He was trying to convince himself, but I don't really think he fell out of love.
And I think
actually did. Yeah, no, I think he was totally deluded, and he did not love her. He never loved her. He was in love with this. It's that thing where you're not actually in love with the person. It's an obsession. It's not about the other person. It's an obsession that is totally.
Is it power?
No, it wasn't. It was just the thing that we do as humans, like where you pick this person to play out all your psychological crap on. Like, it's just, he was obsessed with her. He made her into an idealized sort of thing that wasn't real. And over time, it was interesting. The moment that he realized that he didn't like her was the moment that he heard from that lady on the train that she thought he was a very nice guy, and she thought of him as a friend. And it was like the delusion could hold no longer. It was.
You mean those profound, so in-depth descriptions of his love for her, for Odette?
But that's not love. That's like that other thing that we do. Like, have you not ever had that where you're obsessed with a person and then you finally break away from it, and years later you're like, I don't even know. That was not about them. That was about falling in love and getting swept up in something that has nothing to do with the other person.
But there's a love that's beyond. I suspect that Odette actually did love her in a more sane way. She probably had her own. She could write a whole novel from her perspective, perhaps.
Yeah,
that is yet to be done.
Yeah,
you just made $1 million.
There's a mix of practicality in there too, right? But like, I think that Swann actually, beyond all his bullshit mental games, like there is like some sort of core, or else I don't think core of love or something, or else I don't think that he would have married her.
No, I mean, I think that, Jennifer, you have a point, and like I can't necessarily testify to my own relationships. I'm gonna have to go through them with a fine tooth comb now and think about it. But
have fun with that.
But like, I know, yeah, exactly, yeah, but I know exactly what you mean, because you can be so deluded into being. This was like in Camus' The Fall. Like, he talks about being married to a woman for 25 years and realizing he never loved her, but it was just this thing that he had like worked up in his head, and like, but like actually he was just performing, and that is a real deal. I don't know if that is like still like jive in against like your readings or whatever, but Cesaria, sorry, I know that you were you have something.
I'm probably breathing too heavily. That's probably why. But.
No. I thought that you were going to say something before I talked.
No, I just wanted to. I don't want to interrupt your speech, but I think this is relevant because I thought of this as I was reading it in the Freudian angle, but I happen to have read Zizek's book on Lacan, and there was a quote that said, "Love is giving something you don't have to someone who doesn't want it." And that's the quote. And I thought about this whole relationship between Swann and Odette this entire time. But keep going.
Wow.
What? No, that's hold on. That
love is giving something to someone who doesn't want it.
Love is giving something you don't have to someone who doesn't want it. And I think that's the entire relationship between Swann and
Odette. Yeah,
because
makes sense.
Swann doesn't love Odette, and Odette doesn't want his love. Like, that is the whole thing. But they end up together. And one of the aspects of the book that I just want to talk about as far as like how it's formed and maybe you disagree with me.
I don't know if that's
cheering,
love, though.
I was cheering for Swann to get away from Odette as I'm reading this book, and then ends with this amazing line that Daniel already mentioned as far as like, oh, I never loved her, and she wasn't even my type, and then it just casually mentions that Odette is his wife later on. I love how he brought that out.
I have
drops these bombs after, and you're like, oh my gosh, there were so many times that I thought all of this was in his head, and I would read about his jealousies and everything, and then I would see in the next paragraph, but actually she was cheating on him with this other, and it was sort of like he just drops these little things in there, and you almost miss them, but they're so important.
I just want to say Odette is my hero.
Yeah, I think we have to say a little bit about Odette, because honestly, I think when you think about her, she really gets short shrift. But when you think about her as a character and try to imagine her perspective, what her social standing is, what it's like for women during this time, and how little choice she really had, sort of how unfair, I don't know if it's unfair how we portray her, because I don't really know that everybody portrays her or perceives her the same way, but I think she's a very different character.
Remember how she's described in the last section? And also, how old is he in that last section? Remember when this whole thing of going to the Champs-Élysées with Francois taking him there? Then that's where he meets Gilbert.
I'm guessing he's like 13. He's like right at the age when you could play innocently, but you're basically beginning to get the hormones.
Even maybe like 10, I could see.
Yeah. That possible. Yeah.
But I remember him describing, I don't have to find it, but describing Odette, or seeing Odette, and how she kind of had this queenly quality about her. That she would, obviously she had a footman, and, that there was some kind of quality. I mean, that he saw her at some point walking through the grounds or the garden on the Champs-Élysées or somewhere around there. And that was that quality about her. Now, is that a quality about her that she came into after she married? I mean, because he also referred to that somehow she was this woman of, questionable quality, married Swann, and is now, they're kind of friends with the Prince of Wales.
No, I think I think he's friends with the Prince of Wales, but I think he lost social standing by marrying her.
Oh, really? Okay.
I don't think I'm not sure that they're friends now.
And there has to be love. I mean, I know that I sound nuts. There has to be love.
Well, that's the thing. That's what I think was so important, right? It could be now. Now it's love, because it's like when you're married, and I don't know if you've all been married, but it's like you have two marriages, and the first one, it takes you a long time to get over the fact that, you're not, most of what you believe about the other person and think about is sort of made up. So once that obsessive grip was lost, he didn't have the sickness anymore, that cancerous sickness that he kind of talked about throughout this middle part of the book. And then once that lost its grip, I can imagine that now he can see Odette, and he can see her in a way that will engender true love, real love for another person in an unselfish way. So I think that does.
This is what I was referring to. Of course, I've got it wrong. You know who that is? This is in that last section. You know who that is? Madame Swann. That conveys nothing to you, Odette de Crécy. Then, Odette de Crécy then? Odette de Crécy. Why? I thought as much. Those great sad eyes. But I say, she can't be as young as she once was, eh? I remember I had her on the day that McMahon went.
Yeah.
I shouldn't remind her of it. Wait a minute. I should remind her of it if I were you. She is now Madame Swann, the wife of a gentleman in the Jockey Club, a friend of the Prince of Wales. Apart from that, though, she is wonderful still.
Yeah, apart from that, right?
Apart from that, though.
And I kind of thought that the way that they viewed her, because she sort of sounded like she had these ridiculous outfits on. I don't know if they were ridiculous, but they were maybe beautiful to the little boy. But to everyone else, it's like, what on earth is she wearing? Why is he so... I remember when he goes and he tries to find out where Odette is, the little boy tries to go because he just anything to be close to Gilbert, right?
Right.
He goes on this walk and he sees her. And then at one point he sees her walking with the man and the coach is like behind them.
Right.
And it's sort of this street where women go to be alone, or, you know, it seems out of the way. And I thought, well, is she meeting up with Forgeville? And he innocently didn't even know that. Do you think that was him in the gray hat?
Maybe. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, in a weird way. Yeah.
I hope he ties these together for us a little bit, like later on in the other.
There's a passage late in the book that maybe goes to all this. It's basically the narrator saying, but when the belief disappears, there survives it, more and more vigorous, so as to mask the absence of the power we have lost to give reality to new things. A fetishistic attachment to the old things which are belief once animated, an attachment to the old things that are belief once animated, as if it were in them and not in us that the divine resided, and as if our present lack of belief had a contingent cause, the death of the gods.
Yeah, I love that.
I love that line.
So I don't know. I mean, that cuts against my theory that, like, they have a happy marriage now. That almost suggests, like, he's attached to her, you know, for this weird reason, this weird fetish thing.
Yeah, I think he's like we all are, in the sense that, you know, maybe he doesn't have the same grip. He's not so immersed in the passions of love that happen in the beginning, especially when it's not really all that reciprocal, and it takes a sort of dark and ugly turn. Because, I mean, if it's reciprocated, it still has the same energy. It's just reciprocated, right? But this sort of makes me think, I don't know, I lost my train of thought, but I think that it was interesting that he has this feeling about her that was so, you know, profound, and then it becomes so, it's like it just goes away, it just dissolves. It's just, I don't know. Have you ever had that feeling? Because if you have, it's hard to describe, but because I've had that feeling and I've had that experience of something happening, and suddenly it's like, oh yeah, I don't need to obsess about that. I can let that go.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure what you're referring to. I wanted to respond to your point, but could you
clarify
on that? Yeah.
I mean, don't you mean, like, just, I don't think you're crazy. I mean, are you talking about, like, when you look back and you're like, oh man, like, we were like all lovey-dovey for 2 years, and now I'm like, what was I thinking? Is that?
Yeah, I guess it's like when, and I think honestly, it feels like this all feels very immature, right? This all happened for me when I was very young. Like, this does not seem to be what a mature love really looks like. So when you think about your relationship when you were in your teens or 20s, and you were just obsessed, and it was all consuming, and, you know, if it's not reciprocated, like a crush almost, if it's not reciprocated, there is a point at which it dies completely for you, because whatever that made up world is, you can no longer really hold up that facade anymore.
Unless you go insane.
Yeah, right. Unless you're
I think that makes a lot of sense.
You know what? The only thing I was thinking of, just a quick brief comment, is I think in the very end of the book where the author was imagining a love letter sent from his first crush. Again, you already reminded me of her name. Guillemette? Gillette?
Germonti?
Or Gilbert.
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 Yeah.
I mean, I've never met a female Gilbert in France, but you know.
You never know.
Hey, you're young.
Yeah, never time.
There's time yet.
Yeah. But the idea was that he was writing this letter to himself from Gilbert, but he got terrified writing this letter right after he was thinking of it, because he thought it made the impossibility of actually receiving this letter as he was thinking of it. Therefore,
wait, where was that?
His mind at the very end of the book.
No.
Yeah.
Where?
He thought that if he could perfectly pen a letter to himself from Gilbert, professing her love to him, that it would prevent that actual letter from arriving, right?
After the time when they were hanging out all the time on the Champs-Elysees, and she has to go away. So then he keeps thinking, "Oh, I'm going to receive a letter. I'm going to receive a letter."
Oh, right.
He starts to learn that he's not going to receive a letter. You see the same thing happen. That you see, it's like an echo. It's an echo throughout the book. You see the same thing happening with his mother. He kind of has to let go because he knows it's never going to be the same. You see it with Odette and Swann, the idealistic.
But what is Marcel Proust telling us?
That the nature of love is that that it takes, that we do this thing where we fall in love, and it's I don't know what you want to call it, but it's a separate thing from the actual
love. It's not
love.
real and it's depressing.
Yeah, exactly. That doesn't exist. You can't have it.
But I think it's going to pave the way for real love. I think that's the thing, is that when you lose that immature, childish, idealized, therefore ultimately villainized form of love, you can then come to see the person and come to know the person. And it was so funny because you're reading that letter, and I swear to God, I've done that. I think I wrote a note thing where I'm like, oh my God, I've been so superstitious that I'm like, I can't even imagine this phone call or what he's going to say, because now it won't happen simply because it's in my imagination.
Because you thought of it.
After a star lives out, its big fancy normal star life, it becomes a red dwarf, like, forever.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Like that's something how, like, what the two marriages thing is, right? Like,
right.
Well, they say that happens in, like, a psychologist would say, I've heard it said that there is the romantic phase, the puppy love phase, and that lasts for 18 months. And so you shouldn't, I mean, I don't know, this is like probably Pop's like psychobabble or whatever, but it's kind of true, I think, that, there's this, in some ways, there's this period of time. And if it's 18 months, then you need to get married after you sort of started to see their flaws, and you see they're no longer this perfect, idealized either or, the moment they exist for you as perfection, and then the moment they do something that makes you hate them and think they're horrible. And until you can fold those pieces together and get a more realistic version of what a human being is, which is complicated. And what I was trying to say before that I lost my train of thought was that I think that over his time with his marriage to Odette, because we see a little bit of how that is in the time when he goes on his walk and he sees Gilbert for the first time. I think that you see that he's a human being. And so even if he has lost the grip of love in that way, it's never a linear thing. It's this back and forth. And we have these moments where we fall back into that idealized version of love. And I've experienced that too, where, you think that you're seeing a person, you think that you're really in this mature state of love, but then you kind of fall back into that idealized puppy love version. It's just the complication of loving another human being and what that entails.
But maybe I might agree with you, but I feel like we're letting love off the hook a little too much in this novel. Because what I feel what it is, and maybe you disagree, is that Proust seems to be saying that you substantiate physical material objects with a certain power. And it seems to be the connection between what you substantiate these objects as a person with, and how you connect those objects with other people. If it happened to coincidentally happen to be the same thing with other people, that seems to be some sort of love. But it never really works out for Swann or Odette, or the narrator and other people. It seems to be a fickle thing, and seems to be a one-sided thing. But I may be reading too much of a depressive note into that.
Well, I think what he points out is that we're drawn to people I think he oversimplifies a couple of things. Like, in a psychological level, I think Proust gets a couple things wrong when he describes some things about what he does. And one of them, I sort of feel like he thinks that he loves this Odette for this way that she looks like this painting. And I don't even know that he fully understands why we are attracted to the people that we are attracted to. And this, again, is a totally Freudian reading. And I'm probably messing Freud up. It's probably some made up version of how I see the world. But nevertheless, this is how I saw it. And it's that we're attracted to people where we're going to repeat those things in our past, those wounds in our past, in a way that either we overcome them or we just torture ourselves. And I think we all have gone into those sort of bad relationships. Some people never get out of them. Some people never grow through them. But I think it's part of the process of learning to love another human being is picking the absolute wrong person.
But I don't know. I don't know if Swann picked Odette because I think she probably got pregnant, right?
Well, in the beginning, he picked her, right? I mean, he could have easily let that go, right? He could have easily not pursued that relationship. That could have gone nowhere. And I don't know that it's because he got her pregnant. I mean, I'm assuming that, but there could be a million reasons why he married her. I mean, at that point, attachment is so strong that one could argue that even if he doesn't have the same grip of passionate love for her that he felt, that he has something
the deepness and the profundity of the descriptions of his love for Odette are equal to the deepness, length, and intensity of his descriptions about how he's not going to love her anymore. Remember?
Yeah.
And, that's why I'm thinking, like, when he gets to the end, when he says, she is not my type, right? That's like the last line of that section, that she was not, that the only way they did or could have gotten married is because they had to. I'm thinking, but what you're saying is that he was deluded initially and later, right?
Well, I'm saying that his grip of love was different. It was a sickness. It was an obsession. It wasn't a real love. And, one could argue that he could marry her only when that grip had subsided.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the case is or why he married her. I don't really have that answer. But I think it could have been because she got pregnant. I don't know. But it also, I could make an argument for the fact that, there is an attachment that happens when you spend a certain amount of time with someone, even that isn't good for you. So it's like, be careful who you have sex with, because, you're unfortunately going to develop an attachment to that person, whether they're good for you or not good for you. And even if the complete facade of his obsession broke and he didn't love her so much in that same way, I think that it could make way for him to love her in a different way or still want to be in that relationship for other reasons.
One other reason I doubt the pregnancy theory is that somehow or other, pregnancy doesn't seem to have been an issue for her, right?
Oh, is that right?
I don't know whether there was some sort of 19th century contraceptive or whatever, but
hold on, I just want to jump in here. I wasn't going to bring this. This now seems relevant. So in the parlor, if Odette was the girl with the pearls early on that we established, she made a little remark that he didn't understand at the time, but it was something like, "Yeah, why don't you come and visit me in the city?" And the uncle's like, "Well, you can't do that. You're just rubbing, like, get out of here." You know what I mean? Like stewing this whole time because he's got a prostitute and his, nephew, right? And she says, "Yeah, as long as you send me a little blue pill in the morning."
Yeah. I don't know what they did back in the day.
Okay, because I don't either. Because I don't think there was like an oral pill form of contraceptive at this time. But...
Wait, I thought he was saying a little blue. Are you sure it wasn't a pneumatic? Like a little blue? It wasn't a little blue pill. It was just a little blue, right?
So yeah. Then I just was conflating little blue pill, which is that's a graphic novel. I'm just mixing it all up because I didn't understand what little blue is. What's little blue?
It's just a pneumatic post. It's just like a system that they used back then to get letters around.
Oh my goodness. Okay, yeah.
Called little blues.
Yeah. Well, that's also part of the fun of listening to other cultures is you don't know what they're talking about half the time. Okay.
Well, that's what's so great about reading a Kindle is you just like hit.
Totally. Yeah.
See what it is. So that's why I love it. Sad, actually.
Well, read paper and Kindle, I guess, to get the full experience. There's just a benefit from both.
Oh, yeah. You're looking at page 86 where he says, he need only send me a blue in the morning. And I did not know what a blue was. I did not understand half of the words the lady said. But he's just talking about the pneumatic post.
That's right. And so I thought it was some kind of like she was acting like he could be a suitor. Like that. But like the overtones were there, apparently, that she wasn't an actress. She was actually a prostitute. So that makes sense. But yeah,
but you're also right in the sense that when you really think about it, I mean,
like she was saying, call me in the morning. Don't leave me. You know what I mean? Just like the other guys do, right?
Yep. And she obviously had to work out something so she didn't get pregnant because this is, after all, I mean, I never understand. I could see how people could get confused thinking she was a prostitute though, because whenever, he couldn't see her, she would come up with excuses like, oh, people will talk. And I'm like, what? People are already talking. I mean, it never was clear to me if she was openly, like if everybody really knew or not.
But it was again, bless my innocent ears, but it was never there's never an exchange of services for money. But there's very many times where he would send her certain amounts of francs, and I just like Googled it, and it would be on the order of 20,000, like what today's money would be, like 20,000 euros.
Yeah, he was spending big money. Like,
this is
amazing.
This is like Paul Manafort prostitute money.
Right.
Right. Like, This is, I mean, this is a different level. Courtesan may be at this level. I mean, like, I joked about sugar daddy, but like, it elevates itself when it's like, you're kind of like on retainer.
And that's the thing. She was a kept woman.
Yeah.
And I think the idea is that she was not the person on the street corner. She was no Julia Roberts, in Pretty Woman or whoever that woman's name is. But she was somebody who was known. She was a gold digger. Like, she was just known to only date people, so to speak, that would support her lifestyle. So it's not like it was her profession. It was just like she was that kind of a person.
Also, I think we have to introduce the fact, and someone who can pronounce the word better than I can, that the way that Swann and her made love was by their little secret code word, what is it, Catalias? All right, there we go.
Yeah,
So I don't take charge of these things.
But I wanted to ask Daniel about his Marxist reading.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. You know what? Let me bring it up. So there's you remember Walter Benjamin, that critic? I think that he puts it best. I'll just give the mic to him. This is what he says. The upper 10,000 were to Proust a clan of criminals, a band of conspirators beyond compare. The camera of consumers. It excludes from its world everything that has a part in production, or at least demands that this part be gracefully and bashfully concealed behind the kind of manner that is sported by the polished professionals of consumption. Proust's analysis of snobbery, which is far more important than its apotheosis of art, constitutes the apogee of this criticism of society. Ellipsis. Proust describes a class which is everywhere pledged to camouflage its material basis, and for this very reason is attached to a feudalism which has no intrinsic economic significance, but is all the more serviceable as a mask of the upper middle class. This disillusioned, merciless deglamorize of ego, of love, of morals, for this is how Proust liked to view himself, turns his whole limitless art into a veil for this one most vital mystery of his class, the economic aspect. He did not mean to do it a service. Here speaks Marcel Proust, the hardness of his work, the intransigence of a man who is ahead of his class. What he accomplishes as its master. So basically, think about it this way. Figuring out the logistics of what the hell is going on in this novel is incredibly difficult. Like, how the hell does, Odette pay for that nice house? Like, what the hell does Swann do all day long? Does he have a job? Like, what the hell does, the narrator's father do? I think he's some sort of diplomat. I'm not really sure.
But the background is like French privilege.
Yeah, and just even figuring out critical plot points, like what is, is Odette actually a prostitute? Stuff like that. Like, it's just fascinating how all that stuff the plotty stuff is all in the background. And I think it's true that, in the way that people usually say that the plot isn't the thing, that's true in a sense, it's the whole experience of the novel, but that plotty stuff of what exactly are the logistics of what is going on here, that is really, to my mind, one of the interesting things about the style is that you have to punch through the style to get to all that stuff.
But I'm sorry. So is this, and again, ignorance here, but just to clarify, is it that it's style, or is it just the times that are inscrutable to the lay? But I mean, are you saying that someone, it's notably difficult to go in and figure out what their class and station and how things were going on given the novel, or it's actually perplexing in a principled way or something?
Remember that Legrand guy who it's he had a basic kind of snobby, thing that he was trying to do, but he had to hide it from himself, and he had to hide it, at the same time from other people, his actual snobbiness. And he goes into this whole highfalutin speech, and Like I over and over again in this novel, when I see all the, the obsessing over this or that, I'm like, well, basically you just want to be, you want to move up a class, or you want to be part of the aristocracy, don't you, Swann? Like, you want to be part of that world.
Oh, I see. Okay, so I was just trying. That's what I'm trying to underline is the criticism that Marcel Proust is able to like rail against the system through this work, or is it that, or is okay, but just so we're clear, or is it that his work is blind to the aristocratic trappings of his own class that he is not able to depict, or like not conscious of, and it's clear he's not conscious of it?
It's the former. I really strongly believe that this is very much in the same way that you're like seeing the kind of Freudian kind of thought processes laid bare here, and you have to like pick them apart and trace them back.
Well, I'm not so sure that's conscious at all. Like, that's actually something I would say is just showing, but it's not necessarily like a critique built into the work, where I think that's what you're saying about this, and that's what I'm just trying to, again, underline.
Yeah, I mean, just think about this passage when, Swann is actually describing what his type is, or the narrator is describing what Swann's type is. Justice is not by another man of intelligence, that an intelligent man will be afraid of being thought stupid. So it is not by a great lord, but by a country bumpkin, that a man of fashion will be afraid of seeing his elegance go unappreciated. 3/4 of the expenditure of wit and the lies told out of vanity that have been squandered since the world began by people who were doing so merely diminish themselves have been squandered on inferiors. I maybe butchered that sentence, but basically it's like, the wit and the lies told out of vanity, for the most part, it's to impress people who are lower down on the social, in terms of social class. And I think what the narrator is suggesting is that Swann, to some extent, liked, lower class women exactly because he got to like impress them.
The idea that we are who we are in relationship to other people, and those below us are very, very important. It's sort of like that slave morality thing. Those people below us are so important because without them, we aren't who we are, which is above them. And that's super important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the importance of white supremacy as a class order that is understandable. You being on top of it, thankfully, if you know what I mean? Like, you don't see a lot of like white supremacists of color, right? Like, it's not, anyway.
Did you think he was complex, though? Or did you, Daniel, think that he was really just wanted to move up a class? Because I saw him be greatly conflicted.
Yeah, that's true. I just said the contradictory thing where Swann at one hand wanted to go down a class or like, impress himself to like the lower classes, but at the same time, like be with the fancy aristocracy. Like the happiest moment or the most unself-conscious moment is when you see him at the party with his friend, the Princess of Worms or whatever. Yeah, and they just like hit it off. It's suddenly like Downton Abbey. It's like this sparkling conversation, and it's like, wow.
The thing about that whole scene, isn't it that he is just like, he's in his home space, but he also just thinks that they're ridiculous, and he sees how like they don't even know art. They're all pretending to know art, and it's just ridiculous. Yeah. And so he's like, he feels it all.
Yeah.
It's like he knows that's where he belongs, and those people, that clan, they knew it too. Like they knew he was never going to be one of them, and it was the realization was, like, he's just not one of us, and he can never be one of us. You can't escape your birthright. And like, I think he was just stuck between two worlds.
In the same way that the Verdurins, judged him harshly after they found out that he, in fact, socialized with the higher orders, right?
And like when we see that Bricot thing, that whole scene with the Brichot or whatever that guy's name is, it's like that was the moment that he fell from grace, because the way that he responded about certain things just made it real. He revealed himself too much, because before he had sucked up to them so much that he had kind of fooled them into being this other person, this person that was like they are, and was, so not into all the boors and all the people who were just, those upper, aristocratic people. And then eventually, like, he showed his true colors, and it's like, yeah, you're one of them, and I know you're one of them, and they were right, because the moment the clan didn't want him to be a part. He went into that whole Fox and the Grapes things. Oh, I can't even believe, why would they not want to be around me? They're so ridiculous. They don't get anything. They're silly, uncultured ways. So it was all a lie anyway. Him hanging out with them was some kind of delusion that he needed to do in order to be with Odette, and he had to make it okay somehow. But it wasn't okay because he thought they were ridiculous too.
But wait, I thought, and I may be confusing things, but there was a grand scene where, Forcheville, Odette's rival lover, brought himself up in that circle by being merciless towards some other person and completely bringing them down. That really reminded me of that thing, the master-slave relationship you had mentioned, Jennifer. But I thought the way that Swann got out of favor is by continuously not providing his own input and by kind of stopping short of himself. And what I thought is that he was, in a sense, patronizing them by not thinking them worthy or thinking that he would, in fact, mock them by giving his elevated take on things. But I might have been misreading that.
Yeah, the way I read that part was, and tell me if this is what you're reading, was that he can only lie so much. He can only be so
yes.
Yeah, and so it's like I can't lie about these people because I actually know them, and he's very well read and he's a nice person, and I know that this is what we need to do in order to boost your ego, Madame Verdurin, who is just obviously so threatened by and insecure about where she is in the social standing that she must diminish everyone else who is not in that and make them seem like they're ridiculous. He couldn't do it because he could only lie to himself so much. And because he couldn't and Forcheville could, that was it. He was sort of out of the clan and he revealed himself too much to be one of them.
No, I agree. I'm also threatened by your correct pronunciation of Verdurin. So
Verdurin? Oh, it is probably wrong. I have no idea. I have to say this before, the reason I have these names is because in order to read this book, I read probably at least 50%, if not more, out loud. I couldn't read it silently.
Yeah, no, that's really healthy to do. Everybody should read their favorite stuff out loud. You know what I mean? Or just, yeah.
Well, and just to keep track, because my mind just wants to skim so quickly over the words, because that's how we read on the internet. We just skim through articles to get the salient points, and the close reading doesn't always happen in fiction for me. So I just had to slow myself down.
I mean, I'm semi-fluent in French, but I still can't. I'm still awful at this stuff, so.
Well, that's promising. Or I don't know, maybe that's not promising.
I don't know if it's, what I just thought, I forgot her name, but when you had mentioned the scene with, and it might just be a mispronunciation, but one of his happiest moments, Swann and Mademoiselle Alarm, that means tears in French, by the way. If that's any sort of hint.
Yeah. Anyway, I gotta get going, so can you last lines possible? I'm afraid, Nathan.
Oh, come on, Laura, come on. Come on.
What am I doing wrong?
Come on.
You have to go. We're so sad about that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Not. I'm not prepared to give a good last line right now. What you said, Jennifer?
Whoever's ready, take it away.
Yes, please. I'm going through my little file.
I have a short one, which is a kind of a crime, considering his long sentence structure. Why didn't someone start with something that they have, which I'm sure is...
I got something that's longer, so okay, maybe I can go and then we get going. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. The novelist's happy discovery was to think of substituting for those opaque sections, talking about the moments that we can see of people in their lives, like a tragedy, just like a slice of their life. Impenetrable by the human spirit, the rest of their lives and their story in real life. Their equivalent in immaterial sections, things that is which the spirit can assimilate to itself, after which it matters not that the actions, the feelings of this new order of creatures appear to us in the guise of truth, since we have made them our own, since it is in ourselves that they are happening, that they are holding in thrall while we turn over feverishly the pages of the book, our quickened breath and start staring eyes. And once the novelist has brought us to that state in which, as in all purely mental states, every emotion is multiplied tenfold, into which his book comes to disturb us as might a dream, but a dream more lucid, and of a more lasting impression than those which come to us in sleep. Why then, for the space of an hour, he sets free within us all the joys and sorrows in the world, a few of which only we should have to spend years of our actual life in getting to know, and the keenest, the most intense of which would never have been revealed to us, because the slow course of their development stops our perception of them. It is the same in life. The heart changes, and that is our worst misfortune. But we learn of it only from reading or by imagination. For in reality, its alteration, like that of certain natural phenomena, is so gradual that even if we are able to distinguish successively each of its different states, we are still spared the actual sensation of change.
So good.
Yeah.
Wow. That is what this novel does. I mean, that is what this novel does, right? It allows you to kind of have like a mini psychoanalysis. And it's not too threatening because it's not your own experience, but it's...
I don't know if I'd call it mini.
Yeah, neither would I. Anyway, hopefully, take it away, everyone.
I got one. It's short, and it's hopeful. Physical love, so unfairly disparaged, compels people to manifest the very smallest particles they possess of goodness, of self-abnegation, so much so that these particles glow even in the eyes of those immediately surrounding them. Meaning that, like, you know, basically sex makes you a better person.
More interesting person, at least.
Who else is up?
I'll read that.
One. Go for it.
I have so many, but I'll just read this one because I think it's.
Oh,
good.
also, if you have, you can do some rapid fires. Don't feel too, Anyway.
Okay, but during the period when I loved Gilbert, I still believed that love really existed outside of us, that allowing us at the very most to remove obstacles in our way. It offered its joys in order which we were not free to alter. It seemed to me that if I had, on my own initiative, substituted for the sweetness of confession the stimulation of indifference, I would not only have deprived myself of one of the joys of which I had dreamed most often, but that I would have fabricated for myself, in my own way, a love that was artificial and without value, without any connection to the real one, whose mysterious and pre-existing paths I would have had to forego following.
Wow. Yeah. Just one thing that reminds me of that. There's a section where he talks about his imagination of seeing this woman and then what she actually makes him realize by the actuality of seeing her. And it's like that being able to follow. Anyway,
I have a very short one. Unless you want to go, Laura.
You go because mine's kind of long.
All right, you can end it. So let me battle because mine's short. First of all, thank you for picking this book, Daniel, because I would have never had otherwise, and it was wonderful. And my passage relates to a brief part at the beginning which describes habit, and it's one of the reasons I don't think that this book is purely some sort of reading of uninterrupted experience, but of a judgment of experience as it comes in. So here's the sentence, page 14. The anesthetizing influence of habit having ceased, I would begin to have thoughts and feelings, and they are such sad things. That's it.
Yeah, that's so interesting when you talk about habit, because when I was reading this book, I was like, there has got to be somewhere that Merleau-Ponty discusses Proust. And it turns out there's like a whole world of analysis. Because this idea of habit, I mean, it's in Heidegger as well, the idea of habit and how it doesn't allow us to see, because we're in habit. So when we're in habit, we're not really seeing and experiencing things. And it's just a fascinating, and it comes up again, apparently in other volumes. But yeah, I really loved all that stuff about habit.
Can I just tie a bow on something with regards to habit? I mean, this involuntary memory thing, I think it's like the overcoming of habit or something. Like, on the one hand, it's like the great anesthetizing thing that maybe allows you to live, but like, on the other hand, it's a thing that makes you feel dead to the point where you're like, I gotta get my fucking Madeline, so I don't want to, I feel like there's something to live for. Like, I think that's kind of what the dynamic is that he's pointing to. But in any event, does that make any sense?
Yeah, he said, Marcel says something in another, it's not in this book. He says, habit is our second nature. It makes us forget our first. Wow. And it's sort of like how, you you can't be alive to everything, right? Because if you see a baby smile for the first time and have that experience with everything that you experience, you would just die of overstimulation, right? It'd just be too much.
No, I don't want to bring up a thread now that we're doing last lines, but there's nothing that connected more closely to me than the idea of not being in habit and being sad. And when you don't know what to do next, you're so instantly depressed. And it reminded me even of there's some sort of psychological experiment where people preferred being in pain than having nothing and having to be with their own thoughts.
Yeah, well, and also just to put like a little bow on that bow, like whenever he's really sad with his mom, you know, they're just crying together that one night, and then she's like, "Look, we can't just sit here and cry. Let's read."
Does anyone put another bow on and make a wreath?
Okay, let me do this. Here we go.
Okay, as we all know, there's a huge amount of scholarly and academic discussion about this phenomenal novel, Swann's Way, and a lot of discussion about the Marxist and Freudian analyses of this novel. But the most important thing that I think it is about, Swann's Way is about, and throughout all of Remembrance of Things Past, as we all know, is time. And as a result, or as coming out of that, is memory, which is time. And what I have honed in on is what is discovered in really inhabits in all of Swann's Way is involuntary memory. And that is manifested or seen through the Madeline episode, probably the most famous episode or a scene in this entire Remembrance of Things Past. I'm going to read the end of the book because that's probably my most favorite part, although it's hard to really say that because I adore the whole book. But I think it gives a sort of very important reflective perspective on the book, on what has happened in the book, his growth. He's much older now. There are now motor cars versus horse-drawn carriages. And time has passed. And it's just fascinating to see how he experiences this. Because of the solidarity that binds together the different parts of a general impression, parts that our memory keeps in a balanced whole, of which we are not permitted to subtract or decline any fraction. I should have liked to be able to pass the rest of the day with one of those women, over a cup of tea, in a little house with dark painted walls, as Madame Swann's were still in the year after that in which the first part of the story ends, against which would glow the orange flame, the red combustion, the pink and white flickering of her chrysanthemums in the twilight of a November evening, in moments similar to those in which, as we shall see, I had not managed to discover the pleasures for which I longed. But now, albeit they have led to nothing, those moments struck me as having been charmed enough in themselves. I sought to find them again as I remembered. Alas, there was nothing now but flats decorated in Louis XVI style, all white paint with hortetias and blue enamel. Moreover, people did not return to Paris now until much later. Madame Swann would have written to me from a country house that she would not be in town before February, had I asked her to reconstruct for me the elements of that memory which I felt belonged to a distant era, to a date and time towards which it was forbidden me to ascend again the fatal slope, the elements of that longing which had become itself as inaccessible as the pleasure that it had once vainly pursued. And I should have required also that they be the same women, those whose costume interested me because, at a time when I still had faith, my imagination had individualized them and provided each of them with a legend. Alas, in the Acacia Ave, Myrtle Alley, I did not see them again, grown old, no more now than grim specters of what once they had been, wandering to and fro, in desperate search of heaven knew what, through the Virgilian groves. They had long fled, and still I stood vainly questioning the deserted paths. The sun's face was hidden. Nature began again to reign over the bois, from which had vanished all trace of the idea that it was the Elysian garden above the dim crack windmill. The real sky was gray. The wind wrinkled the surface of the Grand Loch in little wavelets, like a real lake. Large birds pass swiftly over the bois as over a real wood, and with shrill cries perched one after another on the great oaks which, beneath their druidical crown and with Dodonaic majesty, seemed to proclaim the unpeopled vacancy of this estranged forest, and help me to understand how paradoxical it is to see, in reality, the pictures that are stored in one's memory, which must inevitably lose the charm that comes to them from memory itself, and from their not being apprehended by the senses. The reality that I had known no longer existed. It sufficed that Madame Swann did not appear in the same attire and at the same moment for the whole avenue to be altered. The places that we have known belong now only to the little world of space on which we map them for our own convenience. None of them was ever more than a thin slice held between the contiguous impressions that composed our life at that time. Remembrance of a particular form is but regret for a particular moment, and houses, roads, avenues are as fugitive, alas, as the years.
End of the book.
Excellent, yeah.
Great.
Great.
But that, Marcel Proust, if you're thinking of ending your sentence, think again. But I wanted to read the Lydia David version of that line you read at the end. Just says, the last sentence says, they were only a thin slice among contiguous impressions that formed our life at that time. The memory of a certain image is only regret for a certain moment, and houses, roads, avenues are as fleeting, alas, as the years.
Wow.
That recalled to me Italo Calvino in Invisible Cities. And now I'm afraid I'm going to butcher it, but it was so good. Desires are memories, something like that.
This is a phenomenal book.
Okay, so I just want to bring something up. Okay, so according to Wikipedia, which is never wrong, Marcel Proust was a homosexual. And
we haven't even discussed it.
Because I didn't know that, right? Don't know anything. And now I'm just like, okay, another story about a guy's complicated relationship with love for a woman, and it's because he's closeted.
Gay.
I think he just chose to write. I don't think it's complicated because he's gay. I think he just chose to write the character because being gay would make this, like, during that time, I feel like it wouldn't have been what the story was about, and that's not what the story was supposed to be about. Because the fact is, as a gay person, you're going to have the same kind of love, the same kind of relationships, and it just was easier. It seemed to me, I thought that it was easier for him to just make it be about a girl.
Okay, yeah, well...
Like now,
yeah.
You had trouble getting it published anyway.
Oh, I mean, for publishing's sake, I'm just talking about the author and the story and, like, where things come from creatively. And, being able to read frustrated sexual identity into why your relationships aren't working out, and like why you feel love intensely but can't quite be with this person. And it's just like there's other stories where this turns out. I mean, we've talked about this ourselves, haven't we? I'm trying to find like a common language of novels and things like that, but this is a theme or whatever. And so for me, it's like a kind of almost like a Bechdel test or whatever. You're like, okay, a guy's troubled relationship in the 19th century with a woman. Is this where this might be driving from?
Yeah, I didn't get that. I didn't get that at all.
I do agree that it's much more, considering how acute he is about everything. It seems, if this was accurate, I don't know the biography, but if this is an accurate biographical fact.
Well, Wikipedia's never wrong.
Yeah, of course. It would make sense in the sense of how closely he dissects things and try to just like run through a quick romantic plot in real life. It would never have this kind of story detail that he imputes to it.
Well, okay, I don't want to. Gosh, we need like a second parter or like a epilogue or something. Because
yeah, I guess all I would want to say is that I don't think that like Swann, the reading of Swann would be that Swann himself is gay. and that Odette is a standby. I think that like it might color and it might give depth to how he portrays the relationship between Swann and Odette, but not that actually the mystery is in fact that Swann is gay, for instance. Even though, interestingly enough, I think Odette had a homosexual experience herself, right?
Yeah. When I think about it, the only thing that comes to mind for me is that if the fact that the actual author, Marcel Proust, was gay had any coloring on the story, it would be that during that time, I don't know how accepted it was in France. It certainly was not accepted here in the United States. So the overwhelming feeling of being isolated and not really fitting in anywhere, the sort of overwhelming feeling of not belonging that you get from Swann within regard to his social class, I think that could be an echo of maybe something that he felt in his life, but I don't really see anything particular about the love story that felt like he was...
That may have also fueled the quality and the style of his writing, and also his parents were very disappointed in him, Marcel, because he never really did anything. And his father, which I don't know where I read this or heard, but his father actually cured cholera in France.
Oh,
Famous doctor.
no pressure. Jeez.
Yeah, no pressure. But apparently, Marcel was considered a loser in his parents'
Oh, that's comforting.
So, I mean, you can think about all of these elements and how they contributed to this incredible focus of his in his story, in his book.
Yeah, and that's all I'd really contribute. I don't mean to deliver a turnkey explanation of everything from a person who hasn't finished the book. So,
my favorite explanation.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, but anyway, yeah, we could have an addendum. I mean, there's so much, and also, Jennifer, you've got to keep us up on what you continue to read.
Mm-hmm.
I will. I'll tell you any major plot points. So I'll probably get to a plot point, you know.
I think what I've read about is that the Marxist economic, the class, socio-political stuff is even more fleshed out later in the novel.
Yeah, I get that feeling too, because he mentions that Napoleon III image in his dream, and so that's what's like, oh, there's so much here about the Third Republic and the situation that was happening during that time.
Yeah, massive, major. All right. Anyway, so I have to go. But
all right,
Cesaria, are you going to be the next victim?
Is that the plan? Because I can definitely relinquish that if someone has something in mind. I'm on vacation for the next 2 weeks, so I'm not going to be thinking about this.
We're not going to be rushing into anything.
All right.
But
I'm not going to be lined against the wall? Okay.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right. Great talking to you all.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.